compliance. They're just users, but they still have the role to not abuse their privilege. They're supposed to be using the information, the data, as far as they need to fulfill their authorized tasks. Similar question on the CISSP exam. Auditors, what is their role? They review, verify security policy-related controls are properly aligned, implemented to organizational objectives. There it is again. So as we move forward, looking at organizational structure, roles, responsibilities, you're going to, again, start to see some redundancy that it's actually, again, driving home your understanding of accountability. So I'm not going to read all of these to you because we don't have time for it. But senior management is the party that's responsible for assessing and incorporating the results of risk management into their own decision-making process when they establish and implement a risk management strategy. So even when senior management determines what they want to accomplish, they're supposed to consider, well, risk exposures like compliance risk in their own strategic decision-making. So in other words, hey, as we build a online e-commerce capability, not only do we want to make money, that's obvious, but we want to do it in a legally compliant way. Oh, that's a second goal and objective. Well, that's going to require significantly more investment. Exactly. If you didn't think of it as a requirement strategically going in, it's usually not surprising that you didn't get it as a deliverable when you get done. So it's up to senior management to consider risks when they make their own strategic goals and objectives. And again, since risk owners have the responsibility for identifying, measuring, monitoring, controlling, reporting on risk to executive management as established by the corporate risk framework, who is responsible for owning the risk and the resulting actions? Again, this is a departmental business unit within the organization. By the way, notice that they didn't say, it's kind of weird, and this is where ISACA gets a little weird. They are responsible for owning the risk and resulting actions. What does this mean? This means, hey, you run finance, you're accountable for the success and failure of finance, therefore you're accountable to make sure that, well, it operates smoothly. And even if you rely on IT, it's up to you to be accountable to make sure that IT supports your requirements. It isn't IT's responsibility to guess your requirements. You're supposed to communicate it and manage it as the business owner, business process owner that you are. So this is where, again, some level of accountability has been delegated internally. I still say, however, ultimately, and that's the key word here, ultimately, Nick will verify that. When they say ultimately, they're really meaning from the external stakeholders' perspective. Ultimately, it's always board level or what they call senior management or executive management level. Well, what if they offer all three in the same question as answers? They don't. It'll be one of those three, and that's the right one. So, organizational structure, roles, responsibilities. Again, that means that who is ultimately responsible for understanding performance metrics and making sure that stuff perform as well as expected. Again, senior managers. And it goes on in following that same theme. Again, who are in the best position to manage, execute enterprises management program because they're the most centrally located in the organizational hierarchy and because they combine a sufficient breadth and influence. Tricky. Why did they choose mid-level managers here? ISACA conditions the question by saying that they manage and execute. Oh, they're doers, not just decision makers. That's different. That means that, again, if they had just said in the best position to oversee, that would have been executive management and senior management. But when they talk about doing something, now you're talking about mid-level management. ISACA says there's an advantage to having mid-level managers manage and execute the risk management program according to senior management's requirements because they have a more hands-on sense of what's going on in the organization, they feel. So, again, This is stuff that I don't need to read to you, that you just go ahead and memorize. It all supports the same thing. Even within centralized IT organizational structure, one group tends to make decisions for the entire enterprise as it regards IT, perhaps. Again, it's ISACA, so it's a little squishy. Sorry about that. Don't kill the messenger. The data owner is responsible. When it comes to risk ownership, I went ahead and pulled out various risk ownership concepts and exam-type examples, put them all together into one lump of risk ownership. Typical questions might include who is responsible for classifying data according to the enterprise's data classification scheme. Nick, if you're also CISSP, you already knew that answer. It's the data owner that is responsible for doing that, because they're the ones that assign sensitivity with classification, which the custodians in IT will consider as they deploy it, according to the classifications decided upon not by IT, but by the data owner. So again, the risk owner, which is often senior management, typically accountable for a risk treatment plan. Not responsible for doing it, mind you, maybe not even responsible for designing it. But in the end of the day, how well a control actually works to achieve compliance objectives, to achieve other security objectives, ultimately it's the accountability goes still back to the risk owner, even if they hired somebody else to help them do it. This is why I talk about, I have organizations that want, that initially start looking at needing to develop an internal capability for enterprise risk management. And when they find out it's going to require a lot of thought and decisions and systems development, not IT systems, but management systems, they say, you know what, why don't we just outsource this? Can't we hire an external consultant to do our risk management for us? You can hire an external consultant to do the activities, but in the end of the day, where does accountability still say with the senior management of that organization? So that's kind of dangerous, because you're actually outsourcing the strategy and decisions of your whole company to an external consultant, that you're still going to be held accountable for the decisions they make. You can't outsource accountability. I wish you could, but you can't. Actually, there's only one scenario I can think of where you can, and that goes back to payment card industry data security standard compliance. If I, as a merchant who is normally accountable for everything when it comes to PCI DSS compliance, I found out if I outsource to a PCI DSS approved vendor like Authorize.net, not only can I outsource transaction processing through them, but it turns out, because they are a PCI DSS approved vendor, along with outsourcing the activity and the responsibility of the transactions, I also outsourced the PCI DSS compliance requirement accountability. Weird, but true. Normally you can't outsource accountability for compliance to a third-party vendor. But this is one scenario where the regulator itself says, so long as you use a PCI DSS or PCI approved vendor, why, not only can they do the job for you, but we won't hold you accountable if they make a mistake. I said, for 10 cents a transaction, count us in. Not every day you can outsource accountability. I like it. So that's like saying, so let me get this straight. If I hire a driver, I'm not going to be accountable for us doing, never mind. You get the idea. So moving along, risk ownership. We've already talked about these things. Let's take a look at a practice question, keeping you on your toes, like I said. Again, according to ISACA, which of the following is or are in the best position to manage and execute an enterprise's risk management program, because they are the most centrally located within the organizational hierarchy, and because they combine the sufficient breadth of influence with adequate proximity to day-to-day operations? Mid-level managers, senior managers, executive management, risk managers. What do you think? All right, so let's see what we chose on this one. 81% chose mid-level managers. Oh, I expected so much better of us. 81% is pretty good. The others of you fell for the trick. You thought, I'm just going to answer senior management, executive management to everything, and that ought to cover it. Be careful. It says, who are in the best position to manage and execute risk management? And then because they're the most centrally located, that almost says mid-level right there. So now you need to practice a special exam taking technique that you're going to need to do a little bit of research on the internet. If you've attended with me before, you've probably heard of it. It's called RTFQ. I'm not going to tell you about what that exactly stands for, but if you went on the internet, let's see, it's RTFQ. Read the question, read the fantastic question, read the foolish question, read the friggin' question. No, that's not it. Not socially acceptable. You understand? Read the effing question. You got to be very, very careful because you got to look at this thing and look at what they're really asking for here. Why would read the full question? You know, that's what it was. I knew it. I just couldn't quite. It just dropped out on me. I don't know why. So moving on again, looking at this, why would all these are good. These are all risk managers, and they're all basically authoritative to a degree. Why would they choose one over the other? What really tainted the question for one, biased the question for one answer over another? When they start saying, again, centrally located, and they start saying, again, with proximity to day-to-day operations, you're telling me that senior managers that are up in that Wife Tower really have their hands on in day-to-day operations? No. So as CB explains, CB went to the internet and found out it actually means read the full question. Yep. I get some people that like that one. I'm keeping you awake, right? Time check, 2:05. Check the progress. Yep, we got some ground to cover. Moving it along. All right. I've been kind of goofy today, and it isn't because of any extra chemicals. I'm just that way. How many of you like the presentation I'm doing, or should I get it really nice and dry and technical? Pulse check. Answer green, thumbs up. I'm on the right track. Thumbs down. Alan, this is way too much fun. We gotta make this dry and technical. All right. So moving on, integration into organizational processes. So far, 8 people like me. Risk management should be embedded into all the organization's processes and practices in a way that's relevant, effective, efficient. We want to have risk management become part of, not separate from, organizational processes. How do you mean? Risk management isn't an activity in and of itself. You know what it is? It's practicing caution. It means that when I say, well, I'm going to be head of the caution department. Wait a minute, what does the caution department do? Why, it doesn't do anything. It just means that we're now going to cautiously do everything else that we do. Oh, so this is where people misunderstand risk management and a risk-based approach. It isn't a separate, discrete thing that you do. It's about looking both ways before you cross the road so you don't get hit by the car. It's a little extra activities and thoughts and concerns and considerations as to increasing certainty of positive outcome, decreasing certainty or increasing certainty of managing negative outcome of whatever we were already doing. So I was already crossing the road. Now I just do it a little differently. So I'm more likely to get all the way across the road without getting smacked. That's risk management, is what that is. So that's integrating risk management. When I teach risk management, when I consult risk management with organizations, they say, how do we get this into the organization? And I say, well, here's an idea. Go ahead and get out your documented standard operating procedures, your SOPs. And as you look through them, I want you to figure out, hey, is there anything that disrupts your ability to achieve success on a particular process? Well, yeah, sometimes if we run out of supplies, or if we run out of fuel, or if we perhaps if we have a power surge or something like that, anything that can disrupt your ability to achieve success, there are things that you can do to manage those problems. So that way it increases likelihood of a positive outcome. As I sit here today, yesterday was weekend, so of course the weather was terrible. Today it's Monday, so of course the weather is awesome. It's beautiful outside. I can't be there because I get to be here with you. But nonetheless, it's nice, gorgeous, 58 degrees outside. Right now, Lindsay is cursing me, I'm sure. It's wonderful. I still have a backup power unit that is dedicated to my internet connection. It has its own backup power. And by the way, I'm using fiber on purpose. I have my own backup power that is dedicated to just the systems here. So that way, everything else can have a hiccup. But as much as within my control, this stuff and my internet connection is going to keep on moving. Because I want to control the potential things that could inhibit my ability to succeed. So that way it increases my likelihood of succeeding. Everything that you do that with. So that's integrating risk management into your normal organizational processes. So that means the problem is you got to get people out of their robot mentality to where they just know this is how we do things around here. And you have to get them to actually start stretching the boundaries to think about, well, what would make this work even better? And what would make this to where it won't be subject to potential failures that sometimes interrupt things. By the way, the reason my backup power is on, because like an idiot, I had all this stuff standing by, but since it was a beautiful day, I didn't have it on because, hey, there's no weather to interfere, right? Bad risk management. I had failed to identify threats that could interrupt power. I thought it was just weather. No, turns out they have some construction going on not too far from here where they're building a huge development. And there was just a little blip. And that's all it takes to reset your internet connection, isn't it? So now, I don't care how nice the weather is. My backup power is on. And by the way, I do test the backup power to make sure that it works. So never trust a control till it's tested. All right? So organizational culture. An indicator of having a good high maturity of an enterprise's IT risk management process is when the organization's employees and management have appropriate awareness of risk and are comfortable talking about it. That is ISACA's idea of a symptom that shows you probably have good organizational culture for managing risk. We understand also from an examining standpoint, without understanding the organization's risk culture, such as how and why the enterprise makes decisions regarding risk, a risk management methodology cannot be determined. What? Or as they say in France and in parts of Canada, quoi? I've already hit pretty much the limits of my French, except for chauvin, I guess it is, hot wine. Because when you're in the winter in France, as I was over the New Year's, you want to find a stand that's selling hot wine. It's delicious. At any rate, so going back to this, if the organization, if we're going to manage risk together, you and I in the same organization, we need to have an understanding as to how to manage risk according to the same assumptions. Meaning, if you're in IT and I'm in compliance, I of course care about compliance requirements. Maybe you in IT, not so much. You figure it's my problem. But it's your IT that could put me out of compliance as the organization. So from here on out, IT, you're going to consider potential compliance risk when you manage your risk in IT. And you know what? You say that I should start considering, we'll say, financial risk. That when I impose compliance requirements, I should really check to see if it's really financially feasible to actually abide compliance requirements. Some organizations, they'll look at compliance requirements and say, the ones that cost us a lot of money and can put us out of business, those we want to actually comply with. The ones that give us a slap on the hand and say, don't do that, that's bad, but they don't do anything else, organizations will say, those are not the kind of compliance requirements we're going to spend money on. So it could be that attention to financial value for compliance achievement informs the organization as to how diligent they're going to be in abiding law. Yeah. So when we're managing risk together in the same organization, we all need to understand that everything we do has some aspect of financial impact, has some aspect potentially of reputational impact, some aspect of compliance impact. Whether you're doing a risk assessment on your process and assets over there, or I'm doing a risk assessment on my process and assets over here, since we both work in the same company, we need to come to a common methodology of where we both assess the same impact criteria. And we assess that against the same levels of risk tolerance that have been developed for organizational-wide assessments. So that way, in IT, they can't say, you know what, there is no limit to compliance risk we're willing to tolerate. But in compliance, I say, there is no floor of compliance risk we're willing to tolerate. We're both looking at compliance risk. One says we can take all, and the other one says we can take none, but we work in the same organization. That doesn't work. So going back to point number 2, if you don't understand your organization's risk culture and how to make risk decisions according to the organization's criteria, we won't be able to develop this risk management methodology. I just taught you a whole bunch of establishing an enterprise risk management system, such as what you would do with leveraging ISO 31000, just to kind of give you a backgrounder on where that point came from. And I respect that they have that point because they didn't used to, and that's a nice point to make if you really understand risk management. So, organizational culture, behavior towards taking risk, negative outcomes, policy compliance. These are all part of an enterprise's risk culture until senior management, along with good governance that we learned earlier, takes it upon themselves to try to drive some consistency of culture throughout the organization when it comes to how we take risk, how we'll tolerate negative outcomes, how we'll comply with our own policies. It's until it's important to them, it won't really be important to the middle or the ground level. Again, it just goes to show good governance drives good risk management with good risk-aware organizational culture. I've gotten way beyond their 2 points that you need to know for your test, but it's really important for real-life implementation. Not that this exam is really geared to that. By the way, if you really want to know how to set this stuff up, take a look at our website at certifiedinfosec.com. The website address is down at the bottom of the page. And if you hover over the in the menu, you'll find a thing called free webinars. Free as in free. Free as in you don't even have to register for them. You can see the information and use the webinars anonymously. We don't know who you are, don't care. It's just there for your, learning. So if you wanted to get kind of an introduction to leveraging ISO 31000 for risk management, like what I've been referring to, you could go do that for free there. It's a good deal. So moving on, again, organizational culture is important to ISACA. They understand how important this is. They say a risk-aware culture is a good thing, and how would you recognize if you had one? But they also say that the opposite of a good positive risk culture is something called a blame culture. It's not a technical term I've seen anywhere else, but ISACA has it. And they say if you have a blame culture, what are you going to get? It will hinder effective risk mitigation because it defeats accountability. And this is, again, where it could be that data owners don't want to take accountability for compliance, and they want to blame IT, perhaps, who are just custodians, even though they never really took it on themselves to work with IT to make sure that IT is supporting their compliance requirements. That blame culture doesn't cut it when it comes to risk accountability. And that also means that you won't have good, effective risk mitigation because they feel like they can blame somebody else for the problems. So, as we look at this, I hope you can remember one slide back. Your practice question is, a blame culture enhances effective risk mitigation because it enforces accountability. True or false? Only two answers, true or false. Which way you going? By the way, you won't have a single true-false question on your ISACA CRISC exam. Why am I asking it as a practice question? There aren't really very many interesting ways you can make a question around this principle. And when it's something that you just need to memorize, so that way when you see it again, you'll know the right answer, you'll pick it. And that's why I give you some true-false questions sometimes. All right. What do they say? Smoke them if you got them. Pick your answer. In 3, 2, 1, click. A blame culture enhances, you're right, it doesn't enhance effective risk mitigation. It actually counters effective risk mitigation. Yay! 100% of the audience got it right. Outstanding. Now we're on the right track. That's what I'm talking about. It's the best thing I can do for my New York people. I've got a terrible New York accent. Sorry about that. I'm in Atlanta. What can I say? So, moving along. I have New Yorkers going, you didn't even sound it. That was New Jersey. New Jersey? I don't know. Moving along. So, policies and standards as we go. Policies and standards. I was just reading NM's response. Better than the InfoSec course instructor. Yeah. Yeah, you know what, NM, you're in Miami, but so are all your other friends from Niagara Falls, you bunch of snowbirds. So, policies and standards. Actually, you probably permanently live there, so that means you are not a snowbird. Policies and standards. Let's go ahead and move on into that. Policy overview. Again, that whole governance thing that we need. Management and intent that needs to be expressed and followed in order for the rest of the stuff to be done. That actually is not just spoken. It's actually expressed and formalized, cemented in a policy. The purpose of us having an information security policy then gives us consistency. We're making sure that we have all security activities conducted, implemented in a nice, consistent, agreed upon, controlled manner, that we achieve information security capability that meets our changing business needs because it's driven from the top down, that it puts in place a clearly defined framework for ongoing security capability. That framework is essentially a recipe for doing information security properly, with the right scope, the right roles, responsibilities, and things like this. If you wanted to learn more about that, see me for the ISO 27001 Information Security Management training that we do. By the way, for better or worse, right now, Pearson and O'Reilly are considering offering having me provide training for ISO 27001 information security management, and I believe even the ISO 22301 business continuity management. Stay tuned. So moving on, policies and standards. Again, in an examining way, what are used to guide, determine an enterprise approach to risk management? Well, it would be what was agreed upon in a enterprise policy. We have two control methods. All right, my CISSPs that are out there, be very careful. You know, if I ask you, well, what kind of controls do we have? You'd say, well, you know, you got your administrative controls, and you got your technical controls, and you got your physical controls. Put it away for a moment, because those kinds of answers kind of go with ISACA, but they also conflict because ISACA has different ideas on it. And when it comes to your exam, it's ISACA's exam, not ISC Square's. I point this out to you because sometimes you can come in knowing what's right on the CISSP exam and find that that very same question has a different answer on ISACA's exam. It's true. So, policies and standards. We have two control methods. We have technical and we have non-technical. You go, but where's administrative? It's non-technical. Oh, I see what they did. Where's physical? Well, you can have technical physical controls. You can have non-technical physical controls. Ah. Policies are no longer administrative controls. For ISACA, policies are non-technical management controls. Yeah, but Alan, they wouldn't even put administrative control as a potential answer, would they? Just to catch those people who don't prepare ISACA's way. And as comedian Lewis Black would say, and those people, you have to fill in the blanks. I can't do it here. So, policies and standards. A corporate information security policy must be regularly reviewed and updated to ensure that it incorporates best practices. That's ISACA's field. Information security procedures should be updated as new software is released in production. Things just to memorize, again, when it comes to policies and standards and ways of doing things. What allows a risk professional to determine whether firewall deployments are deviating from the enterprise's information security policy? This is hilarious. Instead of saying, well, look at your firewall configuration or baselines, they call it the firewall parameter settings, because calling it the firewall's configuration settings would be too easy and obvious. They got to call it the firewall parameter settings. I guess I do parameter management instead of configuration management. On ISACA's exam, probably so. Policies and standards. A bring your own device policy that is approved, communicated, will not be effective without what? Proper education and training of all users would be a good answer. You get the idea. Hands-on examples of the concepts of using policies to state the way and the intent that management wants to go. These are examples that you'll memorize for your tests. So let's see how well you were listening. Enterprise security policies are considered what? Technical guidelines, non-technical management controls, non-technical administrative controls, or logical administrative controls. What do you think? All right, let's see how we did. Outstanding, well, kind of outstanding. First off, we have two kinds of controls, technical and non-technical. I'm going to already start teaching you exam tips, how to answer questions when you didn't even listen. If you only know technical and non-technical controls as being your two control types, you could throw out the last answer, logical administrative controls, couldn't you? Doesn't say technical or non-technical, and that's the only two types we have. They have variants within the two types,